I wanted to start, actually I want to start by asking the audience, how many people here are, and this is not a trick question and nothing's going to happen, how many people are not from Texas? Okay, well, we'd like to welcome you. We're not going to make you leave. I can see that you're forgiven if it made you feel nervous by even asking. I want to start by asking each of you, knowing that the room seems to be people that are probably pretty familiar with the issues we'll be talking about. What do you think are the most pressing problems in the education area, higher ed and public, whatever you want to emphasize, and what do you think is really going to is most important for you to pay attention to? I think I'm going to start with you, Senator Sulliger.
What we are going to deal with most in this legislative session is money. Doesn't matter whether it's public schools or institutions of higher learning, they run on money. The challenge for people like us is you don't address any challenge or problem by simply throwing money at it. Look where the values are, maximize those values, address those problems that exist. We appear to be at a crossroads, both in public education and higher education, where we're starting to look at outputs and how to maximize our outputs in both areas to address changing demographic in public schools and see to it that public schools do what they're designed to do for the greatest number of Texans, realizing that the future of young people is very much in proportion to their ability to get an education, to have that education available. In higher education, we are for the first time looking at the outputs of higher education. And while I am reluctant to change very far from the attitude that education is a reward in itself, that nowadays people are expecting something. We have certain demands in a worldwide workforce for higher education. We need an educated workforce, and we need it ever expanding as worldwide population does and international competitiveness. And so that's a big challenge as well.
So for you, and we'll drill down deeper, but if somebody was to come up to you and say, so what's the most important piece of that? What's the most important point of access for you to achieve these things this session? What's taking up space on your desk and in your head?
In higher education, the first challenge we've got in a growing state is to see to it that we have access, a seat for every young person who wants access to higher education, and see to it that it is truly a quality higher education.
Dr. Allen, how about you? What are you focused on, and what do you think is the most important thing you need to tackle this time?
I have two things that I really want to be, that I would like to see change this legislative session. A little background information for those in the audience. I am an educator by profession, and I was a teacher for 14 years, assistant principal for 1, long enough to be the underdog, principal for 16 years, central office for 6 years, adjunct professor at the university for 6 years. So I want you to know that my concern is education. Even though I'm a legislator, I just got here to do that. I've been here 9 years. My concern is, as I look at the educators and the education system, my concern is that our customers are leaving us. Our dropout rate exceeds, and we don't like to say it, but it really is around the 50% mark. And so we need to do things that make kids excited about going to school and make schools less stressful, i.e. too much testing. When we do 15 tests a year, and that's just the ones that are required by the state. The state has 15 tests, so we need a massive reduction in the tests that we are giving. The other side of the coin is I want the teachers and the administrators to stay with us. The average principal is leaving his or her job at the age of 54. The accountability system is too strenuous for anybody to keep up with. And so teachers abandon it because they feel like it's something that they cannot achieve. Administrators leave us as soon as they can get a combination of 30, and they walk out and leave. And kids are left without teachers. And my daughter is a school principal, my son was a school principal, so I get to hear all of the feedback and kickback from what's going on the ground. And so those are two things that we really need to be working on. Dropout rates, down testing, and making it a palatable place for our teachers and administrators to work.
How about you, Chairman Branch? Thank you.
I think, you know, Alma and Kel have hit on some important issues. Let me, since I'm focused more on higher ed, and Senator Patrick maybe can take us back to public ed. I've got one that sort of covers both areas, but I guess, Jim, I would say that higher ed, here's what I've learned in 4 years chairing this committee, and as I start my third term, so sort of in my 5th year of really focusing on higher ed. So I'm a slow learner, and so it's taken me a while to figure some of this out. But my experience has been that higher ed seems to be in this, what I call a crucible. And the crucible is, it has at least 3 elements. Be interested, the audience may tell us about some others when we get to the Q&A part. But for me, it's, there's the accountability movement that's been in K-12. And you know, the pros and cons and the struggle and the tensions of not having social promotion, but not constantly you know, pricking the patient and to see what the blood looks like, but actually, you know, curing the patient, right? So we need to be curing the patient, not just testing it every day, but a certain amount of testing is very important, you know, the diagnosis. So for me, the accountability movement that started in K-12 has now come to a theater near higher ed. And it's in higher ed, and higher education's not used to, you know, the academy is a fairly often exclusive group and thinks of itself in, you know, ivory towers. And so whether it's the private elite universities, or whether it's large public universities, or whether it's community colleges, in Texas we have 1.5 million almost in our higher ed system. And so Senator Sullinger and I have a responsibility to see if we can improve, as he's mentioned, outcomes and the value of not only the quality but the quantity of higher education, make sure we're competitive globally in a knowledge economy. So to me, you've got this accountability movement bumping up into higher education, and the whole notion of testing and holding people accountable, students, administrators, faculty. The next is we have going through a period, we just come through the Great Recession, so we even had private universities that had major hits to their endowment. And so we have this notion of fiscal constraints and fiscal restraint, and therefore higher education is somehow having to do more with less, or do as much with less. And how do you do that? And in many ways, without, as Kel mentioned, you know, you need the resources, and if you don't have the resources, then some schools are going to be hurt, particularly if they were lean and mean already. On the other hand, if someone had a lot of excess, then they can manage that a little easier. But either way, I think we've seen some innovation. And speaking to a South by EDU group, I mean, you guys are all about innovation. And so I think one of the good things that's come about as a result of the fiscal restraint has been the pressure of not having enough resources has forced people to be creative and think about better ways to deliver the same or even a better educational experience. And I'd say the last would be the digital revolution that we're in, the IT revolution, that how we deliver content and how the classroom is disrupted or inverted is something that is hitting higher education like it is K-12. And so we now have this, to me, you've got the accountability movement, you've got less resources, fiscal pressure, and then you've got the IT revolution hitting. And so this past summer I had a chance to visit with Bill Gates in an Education Commission of the States conference, and he sees whether it's MOOCs or other IT devices, interactive curriculum, content, really changing particularly our community college systems as we go forward, but changing everything. And so I think a lot of people are saying we're not exactly sure what higher ed is going to look like 10 and 15 years from now because of these elements, whether it's like the accountability or whether it's lack of money or whether it's mainly the IT quotient. So that's an observation. And I'd say the net for Texas, as we go through that like everybody else, is I would take a slightly different spin than Senator Seliger. He said for him the most important would be access, and for me, access is still very important. We're a growing state. We have one of the most youthful states in the nation. That's our great asset. Our great asset is human capital. Europe, most of the countries of Europe would die to have a young population, organically a rising population that we do. We migrate in about 90,000 folks a year that have higher ed credentials. So that keeps our education statistics higher, but still we have only about 30% of our youngest population have any credentials. So for me, while the enrollment is very important and we got to keep growing, and our Closing the Gap strategy focuses on enrollment and success, or what we call completion, to me the great challenge facing Texas right now is completion. I mean, to me, higher ed needs to have like any good story, it needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning is the enrollment or matriculation. The middle is the transformation that's taking place as students are confronted with new ideas and big thoughts and forced to sort of think through a lot of these issues to become an educated citizen. But what we don't have enough of is a timely ending to the story. And so we have our best universities, our best public universities, UT Austin here and Texas A&M, their completion rates, four-year completion rates are about 51, 52%. I mean, that's completely unacceptable for the type of students that are entering into those institutions. We've got similar institutions in the private sector that are completing in 4 years in the mid 90% range. So Baylor, SMU, TCU, Rice. So for me, one of the great challenges facing us is, are we going to complete people quicker, in more timely fashion, and then pass these financial aid opportunities, the grants, back onto the next generation? Because the longer people take 6, 7 years to get through, then they're denying the people behind them a chance to pick up the financial aid and move through. So for me, outcomes, encouraging our institutions to complete, and right now our system gives all the money on the front end. So we have a system designed from the 1950s that says it's all about access. And nothing, we could care less about whether you complete or not. And the old model was, hey, let the student, if the student can pass the classes and get out on its own, good luck to them. And we're all going to teach a class and go home. And now we have to have the shared responsibility of the student and the faculty and the administrators and the counselors. If we're going to admit someone, we're going to work as hard as we can to get a successful completion, use taxpayer dollars efficiently, and get them out and get the money and the subsidy down to the next student.
I suspect some people will have some, some comments on some of the characterizations of some of those pieces. I want to ask you all a little bit something a little bit specific that you've all kind of glanced over, I think, or at least touched on in some ways. That is, there's a big discussion going on not only about testing right now, but also about looking at the K through 12, in particular the high school curriculum and preparedness. And it seems like that could have consequences for the higher ed community too. And I know you've been involved in it. You've got a piece of legislation, Senator Seliger. Could you talk about that, but also talk a little bit about how that is going to mesh with higher ed, and how the change, how well you think we're doing at coordinating what we're doing in the K through 12 level with some of these goals that we're looking at in higher ed.
We want K through 12 to align very, very efficiently with higher education. So for those young people who wish to access higher education, they are prepared when they end up. Testing is not the end-all and be-all of that. Testing goes to show us progress. It also, in a standardized form, goes to show that we are making uniform and challenging demands of faculty. Dr. Allen points out one of the most important things, and if we look at the testing regimen that's morphed since the TOS tests, when it was reading it at grade level by 3 and not having social promotion, to a testing regimen that is college preparatory. I have Senate Bill 792 that you referred to that takes those 15 tests to 5 tests and largely core competencies that show us what we need to show. Quite frankly, one of the things that Senator Patrick will talk about is having the state pay for ACT and SAT. We get far more information about our students from the ACT test and report than we do from the STAR test. It does some good things, but it is not ideal. And so we are going to deal with that, and then see to it that K through 12 is for every student and that student's individual aspirations and capabilities. And so it's going to have a career and technical pathway as well as a STEM pathway. That we don't, it doesn't need to be a one size fits all students, but a one size serves all students. And I think that's going to be a big thing in the next couple of months.
I know you watch these discussions, Representative Allen. What's your sense of how that discussion is going? Do you worry about there being a little bit of falling back in terms of approaches that we used to call tracking and things like this?
I do at some point, particularly as a minority, I do worry about tracking, but I also see the relevance of, and I want to look at our tracking our students as our programs as a K through 16. So when we're thinking about a kindergartner entering the education system, we're also programming that student to go to college, if that student wants to go to college or if there is a need for that. But let me say, with the tracking system, and I do see it as an educator, my position was always that every student ought to go to college, and particularly minority students, because when you go to the job, you are asked for your credentials, and credentials sometimes say whether or not you're going to get a job or you're going to get a promotion. So minority students, for the most part, must present credentials. The tracking program that we're looking at now, where students can be off at certain points and take classes that they're interested in. The community is asking for more brick masons and plumbers and construction workers, and there is a great need for that. But they also want an educated workforce. You can't construct a house if you don't have algebra or math in your background or some science. There are some things you can't do. So the tracking goes hand in hand with the student bringing to the table some education. So I'm really for all students getting at least some education, higher education. But if a student wants to go off and say, take dance, that's his or her goal in life, to be a dancer on Broadway. I think the school ought to equip them for that. Not that you need the dance class in the school, but at some place we make preparations or arrange so that child can get dance and get credit for it. We don't have to have the mechanic shop in the school. That's not what we need to pay for. We can have a program with Sterling McCall Toyota or the Ford Company, and we send our kids there. That's the way we do career education. This is not a new phenomenon. We need to make partnerships with those branches. And I'm talking to the businesses and the construction companies now. And if you really want students to come into your construction company, and are you coming up with scholarships? Are you doing apprenticeships? And we're doing some of those kinds of things now. But I really like to look at us getting students ready for all facets of life, particularly in technology. And we don't want to leave that out. We cut the technology allotment for students. $38 was allocated for every student in the technology. When kids go out into the job now, or even when they go into higher education, they have technology, or they use technology. In the K through 12 programs, we've cut the allocation for technology, and we say, put your cell phone away, and do not bring that computer in this room. I need you to use your brain. You know, turn that cell phone off. Kids now are into technology. We walk them into a classroom and say, open that book to page 22. Completely turned off. And so we need to think about, what do students want to do? What do they want to become? What will make them a viable citizen in the state of Texas? And we need to think 30 years out, not us sitting here today. Did you know that 51% of the Texas population is functionally illiterate? I wanted to get that on the table. 51% of the Texas population now is functionally, and I underscore functionally, illiterate. We have not done a good job with education before, and we're still not doing a good job now because they're dropping out of the system. Thank you.
You know, you talked a bit a moment ago, Chairman Branch, and I'm not going to completely, I'll give you a shot at this, but I kind of want to keep it moving. About getting stakeholders, you didn't use that term, involved in different ways and in more fundamental ways than you talked about. Higher education reform, you mentioned faculty and students and family have to work more together. Mm-hmm. You have a room, in all likelihood, of education professionals here. What do you look for in terms, when you're thinking about policy formation and the kind of priorities and how you think about this, what do you look for from the people in this room?
Well, I guess, you know, to me, we're obviously looking for good ideas always, and we're always looking for best practices in the policy space, and that usually means something that has been tried. There's been a pilot or someone's tried it out, and then there's you get at least some, even if it's early research, you know, evidence that it is a best practice. So I think the education world is no longer willing to just rely on anecdotes or some autocratic leader who thinks they have a good idea to push down through whether it's a school district or a community college system or a university. So we're certainly looking for, you know, we're looking around the country for best practices. We're looking for concepts that have efficacy. And I guess that's what if the question is, you know, what do we look for from the policy wonks or the people that are care deeply about improving education, is whether it's, I know there's a lot of people here that I think from visiting ahead of this segment that are developing software, developing content, or people that care about keeping value up, but the cost down. That you know, the $10,000 degree. Is there a way to really get there? I know. Again, mentioning Bill Gates. I heard he's coming down for the South by conference. I think he's one that thinks that 10,000 is too high. I think he's has a mind that at some point you could.
What, does he think he can't afford it?
But I think
he thinks we can't afford you.
Yeah, I think 2,500 or something. So, but you know, there's a lot of people that look down on that and say, well, you know, you're going to hurt quality if you do that. And there's a lot of people that sort of question the value add of sort of a completely online experience. And so I think we're going through that sort of healthy tension of what's the best combination of, you know, content that comes across digitally, and having, you know, what we've sort of known for many years, that a really good coach or a really good teacher or a really good faculty member is often the best influencer of a student's, you know, future success. And so, to me, I think we're going to see, you know, if I was to guess, my sense is we're going to have some combination of really good digital content, like, you know, the world's great lecture on Physics 1, where you've got a master communicator and you've got 3D, you know, moving illustrations to make the point as this guy's talking, and you can watch it over and over and over, like, you know, Khan Academy, and at some point, you know, people can get the concept. The people that are sort of late bloomers or slow learners, and so at some point they're going to have, particularly if they're self-motivated, they can get a lot off the internet at a very low cost, really good content. And then the question is, most really good athletes need a coach. Most Olympic athletes don't just go there alone because they're completely self-motivated and they get up every day and they know everything about their sport and they become a champion. They usually, whether it's, you know, running or figure skating, so there's usually a coach that's always there, right, at the medal ceremony. And so to me, I think the faculty are going to have to become more the mentors and coaches as opposed to lecturers. I think the content's going to come to because it's just out there on the web, But I think having a wise, sage mentor that shows you how to apply these things to your particular life and your particular set of talents and skills, I think that's perhaps where, and then the question is, how do you scale that, right? Because what we thought is the old conundrum of education is 1 to 15, or 1 professor to 30, or 1 to even a class of 300. What's your largest class?
Well, right now we're talking about a class of almost 1,000. That's
Okay.
not exactly me, but
So-
I'm involved in it.
Okay. So at some point,
I'm unfair. That's an unfair. It's unfair for you.
yeah, but I mean, at some point, with a great MOOC, you can, you can teach millions, right? Presumably, but will you have the same efficacy if you just let them watch the lecture, even if they can watch it over and over and over, as opposed to then being able to go to a mentor faculty member that helps them make the application to their situation?
Right, there's very much, all of this, how we blend these models is very much in the air.
But let's face a harsh reality. It's the 21st century, and we're running K through 12 is very much a 19th century system. Surely, in terms of way that we fund it, but has anybody ever wondered why their 8-year-old is in the 3rd grade? Because he or she is 8 years old. And if they can read at a 5th or 6th grade level, why do we have that kid doing 3rd grade work? It turns out why we can belittle the 19th century, though, one of the greatest things that ever happened in education was a one-room schoolhouse where you had your 2nd graders here and you had the 3rd graders here, and when the 2nd grader could read like a 3rd grader, they moved over here. And we have to get away from that paradigm and educate to the child. Technology is going to play a big role in that because a lot of kids are very adaptive to self-paced type things, which allows the teacher then to concentrate on those kids who are at risk and are not as acclimated to digital resources and things like that. There is a world of possibilities, but we've got to get out of the 19th century.
Let me address that a little bit, because I'm really concerned about technology in education. I think it comes to a point where we need to merge the two, even more than we do now, and I know that if there are professors in the audience, you're probably using some of these kinds of things. But we, to lessen the cost of education, we could teach thousands of kids. We could teach thousands of adults. We have cable TV now. I mean, how many could we reach? We do. I know the University of Houston does lots of courses on TV. When I was teaching at Prairie View, I taught 2 classes at one time. One was programmed to Dallas, and the other one, I was sitting in one. And I was still talking to my students, but the students were in a classroom up in Dallas. And so we got twice the mileage out of one lonely professor. And so you have computers now. You can Skype and you can talk to anybody. You still can have interaction as human interaction with those students. You have Skype, you have everything you need now that you could, but we have sold ourselves or our children or our students to the textbook company. We are still back on page 22.
Yeah.
And the children are gone. They are in the Skype. They are Googling everything. We're talking about who's the first president of the United States, and they can Google it in 2 seconds. We're still back there. The kids have gone on, and so our world is boring. And until and like you say, we don't need to throw money at education. We need to throw some money at education. We're taking away money from education, and we need to put some money in education. Everything costs more, and we cannot attract the brightest, best teacher, professor to the academic world if we're not paying good salaries. There are so many other jobs out there that pay salaries where they can live well. We are still in the $35,000. The state of Texas pays $24,000 per teacher. That's what the state of Texas pays.
But our system is not designed to attract the best teachers
No,
or
it's
retain
not.
them.
No, it's not. No, we can't retain them, we can't attract them, we don't educate them. We have a lot of work to do in education, and we need to get real about it.
I want to open it up for questions in a minute, but I want to, since we're talking about technology and we're talking about money and going sort of back and forth, I'm wondering how you assess the fiscal environment for going forward on this, because I'm struck by the fact as you're all talking about MOOCs and building technology infrastructure. On one hand, you can see, as a lot of people in this room will know, the potential for creating revenue streams through the judicious expansion of scale, shall we say, assuming that could be done, right? But on the other hand, there are front side capital investments that have to be made for that. We have to be able to, you have to be able to train people, you have to buy equipment, and before you build the MOOC, you have to have the software to deliver it, and you have to have the content, and all of that takes not only the content development, but it takes training. As you say, many of my colleagues and I, we're not socialized in a system. A lot of the younger guys have. Those of us that have been interested, that got interested in, took certain career paths, became interested. There's probably a bunch of early adopters and interested folks in here. But there are human capital investment costs in that. There's infrastructure costs at the same time that we're talking about really trying to maintain and drive costs down. Is there the stomach, if you will, among your colleagues? I mean, I know all you well enough to know that there is the will here, and you're not. I wouldn't characterize any of you as stingy about this, although some people might disagree. but you do seem open to this. But how do you move forward in the future? How do you make the kind of capital investment in this that is necessary to make it work?
Well, certainly in the higher ed space, I know when I spent 6 years on the public ed committee, and I know we talked about the total cost of technology, not just whether or not some school district, Floyd Ada was doing Apple laptops, but there was a lot of different programs, and we tried to combine the various allotments to try and put more money into both technology and instructional materials, particularly as those two merged. I did some work on e-textbooks and trying to move the process along quicker. But in higher ed, I was recently visiting. I've been, as chair of higher ed, I try to visit, I'm trying to make to every campus in the state, at least the 4 years. I don't know if I'll make every community college. But recently I was in Commerce, Texas. I'd never been to Commerce, and it's east of Dallas, and Texas A&M Commerce. And they had a recording, they were showing me their recording studio. And I said, well, it's fairly new. They'd redeveloped some space in one of their buildings, and a lot of the professors were coming in. They were training them on, just as you say, training them how to give a lecture that's a little more lively in front of a camera, some hot TV, and make it interesting, but make their content delivery more interactive and also something that can be repeated. I think what I don't know if those of you who had a chance to hear Saul Khan talk about his Khan Academy. What he says is the great secret of his product is the ability for people to repeat it. And he'll have people say, I watched something 41 times and I finally got it. And so I think one of the great things about videotaping or capturing on digitizing content is the ability for people to replay it. And so if they miss your brilliant lecture, Jim, they can go replay you, right? Because if they dozed off or were thinking about their girlfriend, or they can now go back and
that never happens.
Watch the lecture again. And I know I did this in law school. There was a guy named Irving Younger who was sort of the great Harvard trial advocacy teacher, and I'd go sit up in the law library and replay that videotape over and over because I was really interested in how you put on evidence or how you do a certain technique or cross-examination and what were the important aspects of that. If I had just gone to one lecture on that and even taking good notes, I don't think it would have sunk in. So I think our universities and our community colleges are already making the investment in this. And one of the great things about higher education funding, we have transferability. So when we give them some money, unless it's a financial aid product for or a capital investment building, they can move it around once they get their wire transfer every month. They may tell Senator Seliger they want it for reason X, but once they get it, they can kind of move it over into reason Y.
Oh, that would never happen.
Well, no, it was a deal that was made several years ago when there was a shortage of funds. And so in higher ed, unlike other state agencies where there's a limitation on how much you can vitiate between a line item in a budget, higher ed has the ability to move it around. Now, at some point, they got to show back up here in 2 years and be held accountable for how they spent the money. But I think the capital investment in technology is taking place in dramatic fashion. We got examples like at UT, the investment in MyEDU by the system, Institute for Transformative Learning, or whatever the name of it is. So I think there's all kinds of examples. The Empower U at Texas A&M system, a big investment in that. So I think, just like life and commerce that's going on, education is investing heavily into technology.
Do you think that the climate is supporting this,
It does, but different things affect climate. And that climate for us has both a policy aspect and a fiscal aspect. And clearly we realize that when you've got 4.5, almost 5 million kids in public schools, and that cohort is growing, and 1.5 million young people in colleges and universities, and that cohort is growing, there are no real bargains there. At the same time, in Texas, we also very often, a lot of us think in terms of fiscal restraint. In K through 12, we are going to fund in the Senate bill, which the House will, I'm sure, improve immeasurably when they get it right after Easter. There will be funding for enrollment growth and about $3.75 to $1.5 billion of new money. And I think if there were more funds available, that most certainly some of that would go into public education and then into higher education. There are two limitations there in their simplest forms. One is we have a constitutional spending limit in the state of Texas, and we're butting right up against it. We can't put more money in even if we wanted to. The other thing is the competition for those monies, the absolute requirement to put money into Medicaid. And then we have transportation, of course, higher ed, criminal justice. We still have 152,000 people behind bars. And so there's competition for those money. Is there a willingness to fund more? Yeah, but everybody's alluded to it. We expect more for the money expended consciously, more now, I think, than ever before.
Is there a will? Yes, there's a will. I don't think there's anybody in the House or the Senate who's not interested in education. Everybody is saying we need to do some revisions in education. Are the finances there? We need to arrange some dollars. For example, a textbook, one textbook, average is $100, average. So if a student has a backpack full of textbook, he may have $400 or $500 in his backpack or more. If he had a laptop, and you can buy them now for $200 down. Comcast will give you a laptop for $149 per student and $9 a month to hook it up. And you can put the disc, a book on a disc, and the disc runs around $3. So if we just rearrange the way we're spending our money, that we could put technology into the schools, more technology. It is a political will to do that, that we think 21st century rather than 19th century backwards, because textbooks in many instances are becoming outdated. I could get that same information technologically in a different way. And we could put a textbook on a disc. The kid can go home with 5 little discs in his textbook, or a STEM drive to put it on. A textbook could be on the drive. You know, that's how simple it is. And put it in his pocket and take it home. But we have to have the will to change and give up some friends who are benefiting financially from Texas dollars and school children.
Technology is redefining education,
yes,
as it should. In Dan's first law firm, when he got out of law school, there was a substantial part of a room dedicated to the U.S. bankruptcy code. It's now 5 compact discs.
That's right.
When's the last time anybody went and bought a dictionary? Anybody here? We have one by our kitchen table because we always made the kids, if they ask a question, say, look it up. But that's what people do now. When we look at the interactive aspects and the district learning aspects, where we think a class of 1,000 is a lot, imagine a real-time class now given to 15,000 people.
Yes.
And so technology is going to redefine education, and I think very positively.
Yes.
Not perfectly, because language education, I think, is sorely lacking in the digital milieu, but we're going to redefine education through technology.
I think with that, I'm going to ask for questions. I'm going to thank our guests very much. We've got about 10 minutes. Thank you, guys. Thank you.